everyone, this is Pete. Welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some of which I grew up with and some of which are new to me. Today is one of the former. This is Days of Thunder, published by Mindscape in 1990. There's quite a few interesting things about this game. It was developed by Argonaut Software, who had, at the time, they'd recently come to prominence with their two Starglider games, which came out in 1986 and 1988, respectively, if I remember correctly. Those are for ST and Amiga. Days of Thunder would get ported for a variety of different platforms. And these days, of course, Argonaut are probably most well known for their contributions to the Star Fox series for Nintendo, which would come out in 1993, 3 years after Days of Thunder. Now, I find this quite an interesting game because it's a very early example of a 3D racing game represented entirely with polygonal graphics. So rather than the usual sprite-based vanishing point racer, things like Outrun, Continental Circus, Pole Position, that sort of thing, what we had here was a full 3D environment using polygons. And yeah, that gave it a much more of a sim feel, especially when combined with some of the more unusual features that incorporated into here. It incorporated a lot of stock car, NASCAR racing rules, such as following the yellow flag at the start of a race and when there was an accident and all that sort of thing. It also incorporated damage and pit stops and all that sort of thing. So there's a surprising amount to think about here. It wasn't terribly well received back in the day though, mainly due to its fairly poor sense of speed and its blocky graphics, but limitations of sort of 3D technology at the time meant that that side of things wasn't really something they could avoid. So it was sort of the best they were doing at the time, and if anyone was going to put out a game with good 3D graphics, it'd be Argonaut Software. So evidently they just struggled to get anything running particularly speedy on the hardware of the time, which was a shame. So I do want to give a bit of love to the packaging for this, because it's quite a lovely package. You've got this lovely glossy box here. So we've got the artwork on the front there. On the back it says Mindscape presents Days of Thunder TM, the only official game of the film to give you all of the excitement on the big screen. Your objective is to race through the season, starting with the first race at Daytona, and, if you're good enough, through the stock car circuits of North America. If your season is successful, you'll return to Daytona for the overall championship race. And then on the back, it helpfully informs us that these are actual screen displays rather than mock-ups, which by the time we got to the 16-bit era, most publishers had stopped using mock-ups of screens on the back of boxes, but evidently there was still a little bit of mistrust around there. The bullshot has been around for a long time. But yeah, what I really like about this packaging is something that Mindscape did for a lot of their stuff. So a lot of them were in slip cases, so there was this outer thing that was unique to the game, and then inside we had this wonderfully pretentious piece of packaging that was sort of universal to all Mindscape products. So, welcome to the world of Mindscape. Travel with us to the very frontiers of your imagination. And it's got a William Wordsworth quote on there. And now I see with eyes serene the very pulse of the machine, a being breathing thoughtful breath, a traveller between life and death. So that's nice, isn't it? Inside, we don't have a whole lot going on really. We've got one floppy disk. This is a single-sided disk, I think, so it'll run on pretty much any ST. We've got quite a small manual. We've got a reference card, which is mostly loading instructions and a few hints. We'll have a quick look at that in a moment. We've got, this looks like a register. Oh no, this is a competition. Mindscape offer you the chance to win a trip of a lifetime, a trip for two to the States to go and see NASCAR racing at its best. Simply fill in the details requested, answer the following question, and you could find yourself at Daytona, Florida, watching the real thing. The winner will be decided at the end of January 1991 and will be notified by post with details of when the trip will take place. And the question is, name the racetracks featured in Mindscape's action-packed hit, Days of Thunder. Yeah, and then we do have a registration card in there as well. So the manual, yeah, it's in pretty tiny print. But it does explain most of the mechanics, but it's all on these two pages. The rest of the manual is different languages. So it explains a bit about the various tracks. So in fact, the answer to the competition question is just in the manual here. We've got Daytona, Atlanta, Phoenix, because no one could spell Phoenix back in 1991 either, Talladega and Charlotte. And the source for that apparently was the official stock car yearbook and press guide of 1990. And then there's instructions on things like how to do the multiplayer mode, which you could do with an RS-232 cable between different systems. So Days of Thunder has a unique system, apparently, that allows two machines to be linked together and a head-to-head race be contested. All that is required for this system is a null modem cable. Both machines must have the game running. It doesn't actually say if you can play cross-platform. Some of these games that use an RS-232 connection, you could actually play cross-platform between them, but obviously a lot of that would depend on the relative speed of the two systems and if they were running the game at the same speed and so on. So not every game supported cross-platform play, much like today, but for different reasons. But anyway, that is Days of Thunder by Mindscape, developed by Argonaut Software. Let's go play it. Okay, here we are with Days of Thunder. So let's just wait for that to finish loading. Here we are. Mindscape presents Days of Thunder. 1990, this film. Program called Creative Materials. Oh, that's interesting. Other information I've seen on the internet suggested that this was Argonaut Software working on this. Maybe that was one of the other versions. Or maybe this was the conversion. Okay, so, well, if I misinformed you in the introduction, I do apologise. So anyway, this introduction sequence here gives you a good idea of what to expect from the graphics. So, fairly bland scenery, fairly simple car models, but it does have things like banked corners and so on. But anyway, let's give it a go. Right, so we start by choosing how many cars we have in a race, up to a maximum of 20. How many laps we're going to do, the detail level, which will affect how quickly it runs and what the frame rate's like. Whether or not we do a parade lap, but you have to do either a full lap or a half lap. And then you go to trials, or you do a player versus player, which is the system link through the null modem cable. Okay, so let's have a full 20 cars. Let's see what effect that has on the performance. We'll do 10 laps, we'll have it on high detail, and we'll do a full parade lap. Okay, go to trials. Welcome to Daytona Raceway. This is nowhere near as exciting as Daytona from Sega. So, it's 2.5 miles long, banks of 31 degrees, the race record is 177.6 miles per hour, and the qualifying record is 210.3 miles per hour on that long straight. Okay, off we go. So there's no namby-pamby options for automatic gear shifts in this game. You have to do them all yourself by pressing the fire button and pushing upwards. Whoops. Or downwards if you need to change down. And so, I think this was one of the earlier games I played where you... one of the early racing games I played, I should say, where you had to pay attention to, like, the rev counter and what gear you were in and so on. I think the only real sort of previous game where I'd encountered that... oh dear, we're doing terribly, aren't we? The only previous game where I'd really encountered that sort of thing was Activision's The Great American Cross Country Road Race on Atari 8-bit. Which was much more of a sort of traditional sprite-based racer. And so that made use of the usual sort of vanishing point technique. So rather than having an actual 3D road like we've got here, you instead had the road just going off into the distance. But you still had to worry about like gear changes and stuff like that. That was the first time I'd encountered that sort of thing. But the attempt with this game was to sort of try and provide more of a simulation-like experience. I recall at the time people sort of trying to make comparisons to flight simulators and stuff like that with things like the banked corners and the 3D graphics. Okay, we're in first place for qualifying, so I think at this point we can press Q. There we go. To bring our qualifying session to a close and kick off the race. That is a dreadful noise. Okay, well done. You have qualified in position 1. And we are, of course, playing Cole Trickle, which was Tom Cruise's character in the movie, I believe. Anyway, I've never actually seen the movie, but yeah. So you have Rowdy Burns is in there as well, the rival character from the movie, as I recall. Okay, so once again, welcome to Daytona Raceway. Yes, 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 we know. Okay, so you start with the parade lap, and you'll see the yellow flag symbol there. Now what that means, as in real racing, is that you're not allowed to overtake anyone or change position. And so you have to crawl around the racecourse, just like we're doing here, just to show off your nice cars. And gradually get lulled to sleep by that dreadful noise. I mean, if you were actually interested in motorsports and, well, NASCAR in particular, the fact that this bothered to include stuff like yellow flags and other regulations like that made this quite an interesting prospect. But that also kind of put it a bit at odds with the idea of a movie license game. So a lot of movie license games were designed to be very fast action and sort of spectacular and exciting and that sort of thing, whereas this game almost seemed to focus on the most boring aspects of what was going on in the film. So there's no sort of cutscenes or anything in this. There's no interaction between the characters. It is literally just a straight racing simulator of the various tracks on the NASCAR circuit at the time. And so if that was what you was after... Sorry, if that was what you were after... I'm talking like a commoner. Yeah, if that's what you were after, then... Yeah, there would have been some appeal here, certainly. But for someone who's expecting a more sort of fast action racing game, yeah, you may not have had exactly what you wanted out of this game. Particularly given the fact it didn't run particularly quickly. Now, you may recall in the introduction I mentioned that the main sort of criticism of this game at the time was its low sense of speed. Okay, so the leading pace car is now going off into the pits. So now we just need to watch out for the green flag and we can get started properly. But yeah, as I was saying, the main criticism at the time was that this game just didn't have a good sense of speed about it. Green flag, let's go. And so now let's accelerate up to high speed. And you'll see that, yeah, high speed is really not that much faster than the speed we were crawling around at under the yellow flag conditions. And so it's hardly the kind of fast action... Oh! Hardly the kind of fast action recreation of the races in the movie that you might be hoping for. But I mean, it was an interesting effort at the time, and Like, those car models got some criticism, but I think those are actually quite good for the time. I mean, you can see the tyres, you can see the numbers on their sides. They've got windows, they've got distinctive colour schemes. And I always quite like that crowd effect. So, I mean, it's just done with basically random noise pixels. But the way it kind of updates with each frame like that makes it look like it's a crowd of people that's sort of moving around and cheering and waving and that sort of thing. I thought that was quite a clever effect done within the limitations of the technology at the time. For those of us in the UK, this was also the game that introduced us to NASCAR, and the fact that NASCAR tracks are not very interesting for the most part. A lot of them are these sort of circular speedway type things. I'd say that's another aspect that drew a bit of criticism in some reviews, is that in a lot of cases, the difference between the tracks is relatively minor. You're still just turning left all the time. And the only real difference is the colour of the sky and maybe the colour of the ground. Oh, gonna hit the wall. I'm in real trouble keeping my... I hesitate to say speed up, but yes, having a bit of trouble keeping my speed. I'm getting overtaken on every corner. Having real trouble keeping up. But yeah, I didn't really read many reviews of this at the time, but looking back on it, I can understand the criticisms. But I actually enjoyed playing this back in the day. Because, as I've said a few times in the past, I had a lot of time for anything which sort of attempted to put me in the cockpit of something that I had no chance of experiencing in reality. So, like, at the time I was playing this, I had no hope of ever sitting in a real car and driving it. And so a game that gave me the chance to drive a virtual car was very exciting to me. Particularly if it was obviously trying to do so in a more realistic way than, as I say, the arcade style races of the time. And as I say, I mean, the realism value of this is maybe a bit questionable, but oh dear, I have crashed out. Ah, your car is wrecked, your race is over, game over. So you may have noticed towards the end of that, we started getting a flashing light on the dashboard, which indicates that you are getting too damaged to continue. So I think that's probably a good place to finish that there, because it will take us forever to finish one race, but that's hopefully given you a bit of an overview of what Days of Thunder on the Atari ST was all about. So, not the best game by any means, but I'm not sure it deserved quite so harsh criticism. I mean, it's quite boring if you're looking for an arcade racer, but if you were after something that provided a reasonably convincing simulation of motorsports, this was sort of approaching the best you could get at the time, I think. Outside of stuff that was really taking aim at the simulation angle, like Jeff Crammond's Formula 1 Grand Prix and so on. So, yeah, a solid effort that's not worthy of too much hate, I don't think, but if you're after something fast action that really captures the feel of the movie, no, steer clear. Okay, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue a small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.